Okay, welcome to day 7, principle 7, and the start of the second half of the permaculture design course process. And we're moving from studying nature and natural systems and thinking about how they work to applying that knowledge, applying that to our own designed systems. Um, so, permaculture principle number 7 is a very interesting one. I think this is a really key one, and it sets us up for the second half of the course. And you'll hear me say this statement many times over. Design from patterns to detail. Can't see the wood for the trees. Um, that means taking quite a few steps back and deliberately trying to not allow yourself to get drawn into the detail. There's so much detail that we can just get confused by that. Our responsibility and our sort of aim as designers is to take several steps back and take a big overview. What's the widest pattern that we can find? What are the things, the sort of overarching things that perhaps we can't change, but our design has to sit within that. Um, Again, can't see the wood for the trees is an interesting statement. We can't see the wood, the forest, for the individuals. If we're focusing on individual trees, we're actually forgetting and failing to gain the perspective of how perhaps that forest or woodland might act as a whole, has failed to see the interconnections within it, and therefore fail to understand it because we're zooming in straight onto the details. Now, this is the classic mistake in design, is to go into a design process already with fixed outcomes in mind about what it is you're going to do. Oh, well, we're going to have a forest garden and we're going to have a vegetable garden. And um, the questions first you'd be thinking about is what are my objectives? What are my resources? What are my long term goals? And what does the landscape here, what is it telling me that it instinctively wants to do? So it's like turning that upside down. We'll decide later exactly what elements or systems we want to place and where we want to place them. So the icon is a spider in a web. And of course, universally recognizable. Whenever you see a spider in a web, you say, aha, there is a spider. And you can say that quite confidently because you've seen one before. However, and importantly, every spider's web is different. Every spider's web is unique because it's obviously an expression of the uniqueness of the spider and its own abilities of web weaving and its species, the type of spider, the environment that it's in, which way the wind was blowing that day, the positions of the anchor points of the web, and so forth. Always unique. So we're able to recognize a spider's web at all times because we're seeing the pattern, not the detail. So that's the insight that we want to bring forward from the first week of the course. We thought a lot about detail. We've thought a lot about nature's patterns and how they apply. And we tried to extrapolate those processes and generalize about them. So that's how we begin the design process, by taking an overarching, overlooking view. Okay, let's see what David has to say. The first 6 principles tend to consider systems from a bottom-up perspective of elements, organisms, and individuals. So, yeah, our first six principles, we've broken things down, haven't we, and tried to understand them individually. The second 6 principles tend to emphasize the top-down perspective of the patterns and relationships that tend to emerge by system, self-organization, and co-evolution. So that's an interesting one. And again, perhaps we could just pause and unpack that slightly, is if in permaculture we recognize we're building systems, then we cannot anticipate the interactions or that might happen and come about between the individual elements within that system. Going back, not seeing the forest for the trees. So as we begin to implement our design, lots of unexpected things start to happen. And we allow that. That's what they mean by self-organization and co-evolution. We're allowing the design to present itself because we're recognizing we're building a system. We're allowing something that's complex to form. If we think about some of the thoughts we had on Principle 4 about systems, and maybe I touched a bit on Zai pits and a strategy for land rehabilitation, where essentially we're putting the right ingredients to bake the cake, if you like, in a place, but then we're allowing them to assemble themselves according to the weather, the timing, and the action of other elements like termites and so forth, fungi within that system. So the commonality of patterns observable in nature and society allow us to not only make sense of what we see, but to use a pattern for one context and scale to design in another. So if we can understand something at a small scale, then we can blow that up and apply that at a large scale. Permaculture is encouraging us to experiment at the small scale, because if we make mistakes and things don't quite work as we intended, that's a learning opportunity. When we do things at a larger scale, of course, then everything is even much greater sense of jeopardy. Pattern recognition is an outcome of the application of Principle 1, observe and interact, and is necessary precursor to the process of design. So that's interesting again how this Principle 7 and Principle 1 very much mirror each other. Zones and sectors, seasons, climate types, soils, cultures, these are all patterns. And recognize these patterns gives us an overview to apply our own experiences and improve understanding. So I might have exactly the same set of objectives, but I might be deploying my design in a different cultural setting, and therefore I need to allow that setting to inform my design and to actually begin from that perspective rather than coming in with a fixed idea. So designing from patterns to detail also allows the design to slowly sort of unfold and present itself. I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And also then that also allows us to begin immediately without having had to resolve all of the minutiae from the beginning, because actually we can't know that. And there's some very interesting things we're going to touch on. We're going to look at nature's patterns and patterning in a pattern slideshow later on. And I'm going to invite you to watch a really wonderful documentary about chaos and about how nature tries every variable and somehow manages to arrange from what seemingly seems to be randomness is patterns form. And that seems to be the case, that pattern formation is hardwired into our world. We can't seemingly do anything random without it somehow conforming to a pattern. So anyway, there's some interesting opening thoughts about designing from patterns to detail. And again, going back to Principle 1, when we did the overview effect, and I kind of tried to take you into space, and I tried to give you the overarching pattern, the biggest pattern of all, which is, planet Earth, Gaia. We're all just living on a film of air and water on a ball of rock that's hurtling through space. That's kind of perspective giving. And then within that, and also we talked about another overarching pattern, which is the fact that the climate is changing and becoming much more destabilized because our collective actions are changing the composition of the atmosphere. So those are the bigger patterns, if you like, that we need to be thinking about, even when we're working at the microscopic detail right in front of us ourselves. So design from patterns to details. This is really, really a great insight, and it's a really great way to start off the second part of the PDC. So thank you very much for listening.